This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know.
We are back with another fabulous episode of Jews You Should Know. After kind of a week off, sort of, or a strange schedule the last couple of weeks. And of course, the upcoming holidays, we may be on every other week for the next few weeks as we slowly march towards our 100th episode, and I have a really exciting surprise planned for that episode. In any event, there are moments in life that you remember where you were, right? The Challenger explosion, the JFK assassination, for those a little bit older, 9/11, of course, on a really broad scale. And one of those moments for many people of my era is, where were you when the OJ verdict was announced? I remember exactly where I was, and in today's interview I will reference that. But today we're talking to one of the central characters in the drama that surrounded that period in the mid and late 1990s, and that is Kim Goldman. For those who remember, OJ Simpson was found civilly liable for the murder of Nicole Simpson, his ex-wife, as well as Ron Goldman, a restaurant waiter who was, it seems, in the wrong place at the wrong time, returning a pair of glasses to Miss Brown Simpson, and was murdered along with her. Of course, OJ famously was found not guilty by the criminal jury in what has been characterized by many as one of the great miscarriages of justice in recent memory. That trial was a popular culture sensation with all kinds of spoofs of Judge Lance Ito and references to the dream team, quote unquote, of Johnny Cochran and company. Of course, the prosecution with Marcia Clark and Chris Darden. And again, those who were around at that time will remember it well. And yet one of the great tragedies of that entire episode was that it really became a circus, and the cult of celebrity surrounding OJ Simpson dominated the trial, as well as the personalities that I just mentioned. And the victims' voices in many cases were drowned out, their memory forgotten. Ron Goldman especially became somewhat of a footnote or an afterthought in this otherwise mesmerizing celebrity trial of the century. Well, Kim Goldman, Ron's sister, his only biological sister, they grew up together in a very tight-knit family, together with just their father in the Chicago suburbs, eventually in California. She has spent her life dedicated to ensuring that his memory has not been forgotten. And not only that his memory has not been forgotten, but that his memory has spawned a tremendous amount of work on behalf of victims advocacy, working to make sure that victims around the country know what their rights are, or in some cases, lobbying for new rights to be enshrined so that victims could be protected around our country. There's still a lot that's broken about the criminal justice system, and certainly the reality of victims is a major part of that. Kim has been incredibly gracious in opening up to us, and of course, she also recently concluded an incredible 10-part podcast called Confronting O.J. Simpson, where she really ventures to reclaim that voice that was perhaps overwhelmed by the louder voices and the culture of celebrity at the time. But she has reclaimed that through her podcast and owned the narrative as it should have been all along. The original release date for this podcast comes squarely in the midst of the high holiday season, right before Rosh Hashanah. And I think this particular conversation includes some really meaningful food for thought about forgiveness, justice, and many other related themes that I would encourage all of our listeners to meditate on as you listen to Kim Goldman. A reminder again to subscribe wherever you may be listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, all different platforms. Please rate and review as well. Spread the word to friends and family, acquaintances far and wide, so that we can continue to grow our community. Follow us on social media at Jews You Should Know, spelled out fully, on Facebook and Instagram. Jews You Should Know with a U on Twitter. And email us, jewsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. And now to our conversation with the sister of Ron Goldman and longtime victims' rights advocate, Kimberly Goldman. We are here with Kim Goldman, and Kim is an advocate for victims' rights and has a tremendous history and life story. Of course, she's most well known to maybe many of my listeners for her role tangentially in the OJ Simpson, Ron Goldman, and Nicole Brown Simpson story, which of course was a major flashpoint in modern American history. And we'll go through all of that. But first of all, how are you, Kim?
I'm plugging along here in Southern California. Just, back to the grind of school and work, and happy to be on the phone with you.
Wonderful. Now, for those who want kind of like the inside scoop, so Kim is actually dropping off her son to school somewhere on the West Coast, some nondiscrete location, and it's the middle of August 14th, and I was shocked to learn that they actually start school so early. I feel terribly for her son, but I guess good for all the parents out there who get an earlier reprieve with their kids back to school.
I don't know. It kind of came on fast. We only had literally 2 months of summer, and half of it he spent in summer school. So
that's it. There you go. That's all right. The grind. It's hard to believe in 2 weeks my kids will be doing the same. But in any event, Kim, tell us a little bit about where you're from, your background. Are you a West Coast girl? You mentioned you're not from there originally, I think. So where are you from, and what was your early upbringing?
I was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, and with my dad.
There you go, Chicago.
Midwest girl. So we were raised, my brother and I, with my dad, just the three of us. And we moved to California in 1987 when my dad married his wife. And my dad was tired of the winters. So he uprooted us and transported us across the country. So I've been here ever since. I've moved around California a bit, but I'm back now in Southern California.
Very cool. And now, when you were in the Midwest or in Chicagoland, were you like in the northern suburbs, Highland Park, Skokie, that area?
You're familiar. Yeah, we're at Buffalo Grove.
Buffalo Grove.
Yeah, and my dad's wife was from Northbrook. So, so I'm familiar with the whole Northwest area.
Did you go to Buffalo Grove High School or Stevenson? Where did you go?
You were great. I went to Stevenson just for part of my freshman year. That's when my dad moved us.
Wow.
Yeah, and my brother graduated from Stevenson High School.
So that must have been a really tough transition in the middle, for a young woman in just starting out high school to leave all of her friends and go cross country.
My dad didn't see it that way. So it was a little rough. My dad also, like I said, got married, and his wife had 3 young kids. And so the 5 of us kids all became a quick Brady Bunch family situation. So it was definitely hard. My brother, like I said, was out of high school. And the younger kids were, too young. And I don't mean it negatively, but they were too young to have had all their established relationships and stuff. So I was a pretty bitter teen for a little bit.
Goodness, that is that's a rough move for any young person, but certainly like right in the beginning of high school. Did you acclimate pretty quickly to California, or?
I don't think I've completely acclimated now, to be honest with you. And I don't mean this negatively, but there's a different feeling with the Midwest and East Coast. So I miss a little bit of my Midwestern roots, and I haven't necessarily replicated that here, although where I live is very family oriented, and it's very safe, and my kid is happy, but I definitely miss my upbringing. I can't get ahead here financially. It's really rough. It's super expensive.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But
not that the Chicago suburbs are that cheap, no.
No, I know, but there was a time period where I had anticipated or contemplated moving my son and I to Colorado, but I chickened out. So, but it is what it is. I've made a very nice life for myself here. So.
Now, it was very unusual, I would imagine, the sort of the family configuration you had as a young person. You know, you normally think of a single parent household. It's sort of traditionally that would be the mother, and in your case, it was with your dad. What was that like for you as a young person? And were you aware of kind of that being unconventional in a sense?
I don't think I was aware because it was all I knew. My birth mom left my brother and I was 3.5, my brother was 6. And so I wasn't raised with her in the home. My relationship was always super tight with my dad and my brother. So I didn't realize that our situation was different. I think it was as I got older, I recognized that other families looked different, but it never impacted me. I think it was weirder for other people. Like when I got my first bra, you know, my dad took me to get my first bra. My girlfriends were like, "What, your dad?" And I'm like, "Yeah, doesn't your dad do that?" Like, it didn't occur to me that my dad doing that was unusual because it was all I knew. And so I think as an adult woman, I've definitely recognized, you know, not having the, you know, 2 parents in the home or having my mom in my life, how much it's impacted me, but I don't think I was affected by it growing up.
Was there much of a Jewish influence in your house as an early sense?
Yeah, we were, my dad raised us in a Jewish home. My brother went to Hebrew school and was bar mitzvahed. I felt left out, so I also went to Hebrew school and was bat mitzvahed. We were part of a synagogue that was in downtown Chicago. So my brother and I were I think the youngest kids there. Everybody else was like average age 60 and older. But it was beautiful. We, you know, our services, I remember, were at the Knickerbocker Hotel, and, you know, I remember getting dressed up, and, you know, we went to the high holidays always. And then when we moved to California, we continued that. My dad's wife is Jewish, and so we continued having a Jewish home. But growing up, my dad's second wife, she was Catholic, so we celebrated Christmas and we had a Hanukkah bush, you know.
So once you kind of transitioned to the second family, so to speak, there was less of that influence.
You know, I think. Wait, did she convert? Maybe she I think my dad's second wife may have converted. It's terrible. I can't remember now. It was always, you know, Judaism was always a part of my upbringing. It's all I knew. The traditions of Christmas were just part of our family because Joan's family was a big, you know, Roman Catholic Italian family, you know, so we always had the Christmas element, but Judaism was where our faith was based.
I mean, where you grew up initially, I mean, it's such a heavily Jewish area.
100%, yeah.
Kids from, you know,
which honestly is is not a big part of my community here where I live now. There's definitely a Jewish community, but it's been a little harder to find. But I didn't realize that when I moved to this community. But I've definitely found my home here too.
Okay, well, off air, if you want any recommendations, I have a good network for that stuff.
Okay.
So, you know, I can try to connect you. But SoCal in general obviously has its pockets of tremendous Jewish community, and it's sparse in some areas.
Yeah.
So what was your early trajectory? Were you know, what was your aspirations career-wise, and what were you doing, you know, once you kind of moved through high school and beyond?
I was one of those weird kids that knew exactly what I wanted to do from the time I was a little pipsqueak. I always wanted, but I was raised with a tremendous amount of therapy in our home. My dad was very supportive of my brother and I participating in the therapeutic process, and it really spoke to me. So from the time I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a therapist. So while all other kids were playing, you know, teacher and restaurant in their basements, I was playing therapist.
Which itself, probably some parents thought that might, you know, something.
Yeah, I'm teasing. I mean, I did do all those other fun things, but from the time I was little, I just knew that sharing with others what I learned and the experience that I had, it was so beneficial to me. And I think I just had that sort of personality that people always shared with me, their thoughts and feelings. And so that's what I wanted to do from the time I was little, is to become a therapist. So I detoured from that when my brother was killed, but I've sort of made my way back to it a little bit now.
So did you initially go to school for
I did,
psychology
and
undergrad?
then I was applying for grad school when my brother was killed, so I never completed that path.
So let's go there a little bit and tell me, take us back. For those unfamiliar, Kim just wrapped up an incredible podcast that she hosted and I guess co-produced, really detailing the story and from her perspective and from kind of more of the victim's perspective, which is really the overlooked but much more important side of the ledger, with all of the popular media really focusing on the celebrity of OJ Simpson in that process. So she really just recently wrapped up that podcast, which I listened to, and how I discovered Kim. To take me back, for those who are not familiar with the story, to that period and where you were and then kind of what happened.
I was living in San Francisco. I was finishing up my schooling, and I had an internship at a psychiatric hospital up there and was working full time. And I was, for all intents and purposes, in love. And I had a boyfriend, a serious boyfriend at the time. And I was, just in the early stages of the next phase of my life. And I got that horrible phone call from my dad that my brother was found killed in Brentwood alongside Nicole Brown. So we sort of learned all about the case and learned everything right along with the rest of the public. So it was obviously jarring and, very difficult because I was so young and I didn't understand what was happening. And at the time, I just was completely clueless. I never lost anybody in my life. So I went home and uprooted my life and stayed at my dad's house until the end, basically.
Wow. Now, Ron was your only full brother or full sibling, right? And I know from the podcast that you guys were very close.
We, as I mentioned, my brother and I were raised with just my dad. And from the time we were little kids, we were just inseparable. And we had such a great love and friendship. And, my brother, I always say that he was like my protector, and he took very good care of me and made sure that I was always watched over and looked after and got to class on time, got fed and did my homework. But just, I just always knew that I had someone in my corner. And, I feel very lucky that I had two great influences in my life between my dad and my brother.
What was he doing at the time? And obviously your family was kind of living out here in the West Coast. I know he was a waiter at the time in this restaurant, and that was kind of how he came across Nicole.
My brother was, as you said, he was a waiter. He was living in Brentwood. And, he was 25 years old, just shy of his 26th birthday, just like most early 20-something people, trying to find his way. And he was in the process of developing a business plan that he wanted to present to my dad about a restaurant that he wanted to open. He had some potential funders for it and had all the art design and the layout. And he wanted to open up a small little niche restaurant in Brentwood or in the area, I guess, the shape of an ankh, which was important to him. But, to kind of feature local artists and, poetry readings and that kind of thing, and have it be like a small little neighborhood gathering. And that was what he found. I mean, he wasn't much of a school guy. I was the bookworm in our family. And so he was just kind of finding his way.
Was he very into the arts in general? Was that a big part of his life?
No, he just recognized that was kind of cool. I'm sure, I know that he had some friends that were interested in that. I mean, that's kind of a hip thing to do. You put local artists on the wall and local readings and that kind of thing. I think he probably thought there was a good, a niche that he could, be successful. And now
he had, according to what I understand, he had never met Nicole Brown before, right?
I don't think they've never met. They just didn't have an intimate relationship, which is what people like to assume. Brentwood, for those people that aren't familiar with there, it's a very small kind of bedroom community. From what I've been told, they interacted with each other just, around Starbucks or the gym. And I think that they were acquaintances. I don't think that there was anything more than that. Got
it. But he was more than just a waiter. I mean, they did kind of know each other, but obviously they weren't together in that sort of way. But he kind of, I guess, knew where to go to find her, to return her sunglasses and so forth.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how all that came about. I mean, for all I know, he was given the address. I mean, I don't really know the specifics of how he knew where her house was. Maybe I honestly, I don't know. I just know that there wasn't a deeper relationship. There could have been a friendship, but my brother didn't tell me all of the people that he was friends with. And like I said, it's a small community. I mean, it's very, you have to purposefully go to Brentwood. You don't drive through it. It's a very,
Right.
intimate
Now,
area.
this was,
so.
of course, the days really before cell phones and certainly before social media.
Yeah, it was pagers. That was the era of the pager.
Is that how you were alerted through a pager, or?
No, I was working at Wells Fargo Bank in San Francisco, and my girlfriend was taking me home after my shift was over. It was like 6:30 by the time I think I got home. And the news was on all day here in Los Angeles, but it never revealed my brother's name until around 5 o'clock when they finally made contact with my dad, because you can't legally do that without making a notification to the next of kin. So, and I had seen a little bit on the news up in San Francisco, but I didn't pay any attention, didn't know what I was watching. So when I got home to my apartment, my boyfriend at the time was there and told me to call my dad. And so, yeah, but I don't remember. There was no pagers. I don't think I had a pager at the time. I don't think I was.
Yeah,
cool
it was
enough.
like a doctor kind of thing to have.
Yeah.
So did you know right away that this was did you suspect right away that this was probably OJ Simpson?
I have no idea who he was. I didn't know who Nicole was. I had no idea who he was. So I didn't understand any of the notoriety. I had no clue what it represented, what we were about to embark upon. I just kind of was dumped off into this, fishbowl of an existence for a very long time.
I think at that point, most people knew OJ Simpson not from his football days, but more from, the Naked Gun movies and Hertz commercials and things like that. So he was more a part of kind of popular culture at that point, but you still weren't that familiar with his persona.
I had no idea who he was. Nothing. Mm-mm.
Interesting. So when did you get a sense that this was a little bit of a different kind of situation then?
Within 10 minutes, basically, because it was all over the news. And as soon as I got home, there was news cameras everywhere. And then obviously people started telling us, and they were, showing footage. And but I don't care about celebrityism. I'm not that fazed by it. But I don't know that I ever truly understood what we were involved in. It just was, there was just media everywhere, and it was just nonstop here in Los Angeles. It probably wasn't like that as much across the country until a little bit later, but in LA it was nonstop in those first hours, days.
Was your family able to grieve at all at that time?
No.
Because when you're kind of in that, you can't, was it just all focused on finding who did it and dealing with that aspect of things? And if so, when did you ever have a chance to actually just grieve as a sibling?
I think I'm still doing that. I don't think at the time, I've never buried anybody before. I'd never been to a funeral before. I didn't understand that process. So, our next steps were you have to make funeral arrangements, and I had to go to my brother's apartment and help the law enforcement and find a suit for him to be buried in. And then we had to close out bank accounts and, find his lost dry cleaning. I mean, there's all these things that no one really tells you about. And then we had to get him out of his lease. We had to move him out of his apartment. And there was just so much peripheral damage at that time that the grieving process, I don't think really truly started until I would say after the civil case ended, which was after the criminal case, because we were just so inundated with court and just the public notoriety of everything. You don't really have a chance to do that. I mean, there was never a break. We went very quickly from murder to funeral to court to trial to after trial to next case. Like it just.
Right.
Yeah.
What was the timeline exactly? He was killed in 1994.
Correct.
Yeah. And then I remember, I guess the trial was in 95, 96. What was the?
The trial started in 95 at the beginning of the year, and it lasted 9.5 months. And then I think the civil case, I want to say it started in 97, but I could be wrong. I think it was 97. it moved very quickly after the criminal case. And then the civil case didn't last. I think it was only a couple of months that lasted. So, the first couple of years after my brother died, we were just locked up in court proceedings. And, again, the country was emotionally gripped, I think, by the story. The media was very much involved. And so there was always something going on. We never really got a true respite from it. So when the cameras stopped showing up and the news stopped covering it all the time, I think that was when it kind of set in, like, wait, something's not right now. Like, everything's done, everything's gone, and especially my brother. And so I think that was probably the first time that we were really able to kind of sit in our grief and really start to process it. Oh, and then we have, at some point in there, we have the unveiling of the headstone, which,
oh my gosh,
I remember, at the gravesite, Marcia Clark, one of the lead prosecutors, came, and I remember asking her, like, why did you do this? Like, it was hard. It was hard to go back and to have all that pain again, at the gravesite. And, I understand it, but at the time it was so hard to do an unveiling of the headstone. And anyway,
I can't even imagine. Yeah. And it must have been really hard because the case became so much about the personalities around it. OJ, obviously himself, but even way beyond that, you had, Judge Ito, and all Saturday Night Live and all like the spoofs and I remember this as, I was an older teenager, I guess I was 18, 19 around that time, 17, 18. And just, all the dream team of the defense attorneys and Marcia Clark and all the spoofs on her and all these different things. Like, was it really hard for you that it wasn't really about your brother, that it wasn't about justice for these victims? It was much more about these personalities?
Yeah, we were super frustrated. We weren't even allowed to wear any kind of, pin or picture to align ourselves with the victims. Judge Ito thought that would have too prejudicial to the jury.
Well, what did the jury think, that you weren't on the side of it?
Trust me. It was such a, we wanted to wear, the Brown family wanted to wear angel pins. And so the angel pin sort of became synonymous with Ron and Nicole. And so I remember Marcia Clark went into the courtroom and she was wearing the angel pin, and the defense team made a big stink about it and she had to take it off. We had pictures, buttons made with my brother's face on it. We weren't allowed to wear those. And so we were very frustrated, and not to be disparaging towards Nicole's family, but my brother was always referred to as the other victim, the friend. Nobody ever uses his name. Even now I still see things, that'll just say Nicole Brown and the other person, 25 years later. It's super frustrating for me. But, we didn't understand what was going on. We didn't get it. So we were just there fighting for my brother and wanting to make sure that his legacy would be remembered positively. And we just wanted justice for both of them, but it was very frustrating to not have him be equally seen, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and some of the ones that I really appreciate are the ones that move the spotlight back onto the victims, because there's so much celebrity, so to speak, or intrigue, let's say, around the perpetrators of crimes, which is kind of twisted in a way, but the victims themselves don't often get their due.
Well, it starts with the fact that our system's called the criminal justice system. We don't call it the victim's justice system or just the system. We set ourselves up to have the focus be on the defendant to begin with. And so it is very hard, and not just with our case. I see this all across the country with victims and survivors, that it's very hard to have the focus and the attention be on the people that are left in the wake of tragedy, or that the focus should be on the people that were actually had the crimes perpetrated against. It's very hard to do that, and I don't get it.
What was your relationship with the Brown family? Did your families form a tight connection during that period?
No. I think, we had different feelings. There was a different focus. Nicole's family, I can't even imagine, but they were the guardians of Nicole's children at the time. So their focus was really to be taking care of the kids and to shield and protect them as much as possible. we're different families. We come from different backgrounds, different beliefs. So, we were united front as we needed to be and we should be, but we just, we process and grieve differently.
So I think the verdict for many people of that era, it was one of those situations where it's kind of, you remember where you were, at that moment or on that day, not to compare it to, 9/11 or something of that nature, but along those lines in terms of the way people remember it. I remember myself, actually the exact road. I was outside of the Motor Vehicle Administration on Kenilworth Avenue in Baltimore. I remember getting in or out of my car and listening to the radio and hearing that, being shocked. You obviously were there. What was that like? Were you astounded by the outcome? And what was your experience at that moment?
I don't know that I was astounded. I think I felt betrayed, and I think I was just shocked, and I think I didn't walk in there with any preconceived notion, I don't think, of what I was about to hear. I know that there were lots of people in our circle, that our family circle, that thought that he was going to be found guilty, because how could he not be? I don't know that I necessarily 100% believe that, because I was sitting in that courtroom every single day for 9.5 months, and I don't know that I trusted that the jury saw what I saw. The jury was very disconnected to the prosecution side. They seemed to be very enamored with the defense and disinterested in the prosecution's case. That was my interpretation of their body language, because that's all I was left to do, was to study their eyes and their gaze and their fidgetiness, or, where they were looking or how much they were writing. I mean, all those things that you're taught not to do as a kid, in terms of like judging a book by its cover. That's all I had to do when sitting in a courtroom. So I don't know that I had a strong feeling one way or the other going in there, but I don't know that I was 100% confident. So when I heard what I heard, I just felt devastated and just felt very betrayed.
And also the fact that there was such a short deliberation, was it not?
Yeah, it was 3.5 hours, correct. And, if folks listen to the podcast on episode 7, we talked to the jury, 2 members of the jury. Thank you. 2 members of the jury. And they talk about, why they deliberated only for 3.5 hours. And it really kind of validated what I always thought, which was that they were done, that they were checked out, their bags were packed. I knew that. And they wanted to go home. And so, I harbored a lot of anger and resentment, because I don't think they did their job. I know I'm supposed to respect their verdict, and I get that, but I don't think they completed their task, and I don't think they did their job. But
well, that being said, I mean, your work and your conversations with them was executed with so much graciousness. That sentiment didn't come through at all. That's from a listener's perspective. And I know that you're a producer and you were talking about that, and and the people were giving you some flack for even being like too soft on them.
Well, I think I went into this process doing the show. I mean, the name of the show is not called Confrontation, right? So it's called Confronting. And so for me, it really separated out what my purpose and my intention was. I'm allowed to have feelings of resentment towards the jury. I'm allowed to have feelings of anger with their decision. It doesn't mean I can't have compassion for what they experienced. It doesn't mean I can't be sensitive to how it impacted and affected their life. It doesn't mean I can't be kind. It just means that I'm able to put those feelings into different boxes so that I can function in a healthy life. And I'm frustrated sometimes. I think when people listen to me talk about this case, they think that I'm bitter and I'm angry. I get a lot of emails that tell me if I could just find Jesus, I'd be good. And I'm like, kind of a Jew. We don't do that.
But okay,
but I appreciate the sentiment that I think when people hear me talk, or they see me, for the 20-second soundbite, I'm usually pissed about something because it's angering the experience that we've had. It does not mean, though, that I have not been able to find ways to move through it so that it doesn't completely suffocate me as a 47-year-old woman trying to, live a toxicity-free life. So I am able to compartmentalize.
Instead of pissed, maybe I would say passionate.
I'm passionate, but I'm also pissed. Because I do have anger about certain things. It doesn't mean, though, that the anger consumes me. It just means it's appropriate for the situation that I've been placed in, being that I was raised in therapy, being that I have a pretty solid group of people that I surround myself with. I know how to I know how to process that and put it into a healthy,
Sounds very
place.
much like a therapist's perspective on things. The ability to hold multiple emotions at once and be, and honor each of them and be true to each of them and be able to live with contradiction, which is really what that is on some level.
Right.
So
right.
Take me to this podcast because the case is old at this point. What made you want to do this podcast, and what was the process like, and what made you want to do it now specifically?
I don't know that I walked into the room with Glass Entertainment with this in mind. It's always been important for me to draw attention to victims and survivors and what people do in the aftermath, what people do, faced with adversity. I've met some really incredible people over the years that have gone on to do some amazing things on behalf of the victims movement, and we don't give them any credit. It's not sexy enough to talk about that. So it's important for me to always be shining a light on the advocacy element. And this show is in a way a pathway to let that happen, because the goal is to get to the second season, which is be doing somebody else's story. I wrote a book a handful of years ago called Media Circus, and the whole book was about other people's trauma, other people's life in the public eye that had high profile cases, and how people process and the element of resiliency and courage and bravery. And so for me, with this particular podcast, I wanted to reclaim some control. I wanted to be able to have some control over the narrative, because I think for so long in the last couple of years, we've been listening to all these ridiculous conspiracy theories and, fictionalized versions of things, and people that talk about it that weren't even alive at the time, and now they're suddenly experts on the case. Like, I was frustrated. There's a whole new generation of people, our kids included, that are learning about this case through blog posts and Wikipedia, and sometimes those are not the most authentic and fact-based stories. So I felt like I could lend a different voice to something that's been told before.
What did you end up doing career-wise once the trial and fiasco had kind of all sort of passed? Did you ever end up getting back to therapy? Did you get into criminal advocacy for victims as a vocation, as an avocation? Where did your life go from there?
So during this civil case, I was, by way of a very nice star of a show at the time, she got me a job at a television production company, and I was working on the Larry Sanders Show on
I remember the show.
and I was working for a production company for a long time, and it served its purpose because it gave me somewhere to go every day. It allowed me to save a little bit of money because I had nothing, and it gave me some amazing friendships. And then from that, I continued in my quest for doing good in the world. So I went to work for a company called Cure Autism Now, and then I went to Best Buddies, which works with people with developmental disabilities and partnering them in non-disabled relationships. And then now I run the Youth Project, which is a nonprofit organization that provides free mental health to teenagers. So I've been doing that since 2005. So yes, I did make my way back to mental health. And then I also do a lot of advocacy work in the victim world. So I am the vice chair of the National Center for Victims of Crime. And then I am an advisory board member for a handful of other orgs that are all focused on victim advocacy.
What are some of the things that you are passionate about or pissed about when it comes to victim advocacy? What are some of the things you want to see happen? And one of the really interesting kind of observations I had about your particular work is that a lot of the, I guess, criminal justice reform type of things that are out there, at least that I've seen right now, tend to focus a lot on wrongful convictions and actually on the perpetrator side, so to speak, right? And here you're kind of on the opposite side. You're sort of on the prosecution side of the ledger, if you will. Are you ever at odds with other advocates in the general criminal justice reform space? And what are the things you're particularly working on?
That's a good observation. I think that what frustrates me about the criminal justice reform process is that they don't include a lot of victims to the table. And I think that there's some real positive impact that could be had if we opened up the dialogue to include victims, because I think that there's a perception that all victims, we want, and I know this is probably not very positive, but I believe in the death penalty. I mean, and I didn't before. I didn't think that way, but now I do. And I also recognize the flaws in the system that make that confusing. But being that my experience wasn't I changed my mind on death penalty. And so, and then I flip-flop, but I think that there's conversation to be had with how people are impacted by trauma, what you experience going through the system, where victims are not being honored in the system, and how the criminal justice system can do better. We don't have victims' rights in every single state across this country. I don't know why we don't. We fight for that.
What does that mean?
That means that we're not being given the right to have a victim's impact statement, that we don't know when our perpetrators are released on parole, that we're not given notice of that. So in some states, if your person that committed a crime against you is released on parole, they don't have to notify the victim that happened. So you're just walking along and then suddenly you see your person. So Marcy's law is a law that is working very hard to make sure that victims are protected across the country, and it's not in every state. And I don't know why. Victims' restitution funds are not happening across the board. We don't do a lot to help victims get paid back for the crime against them. That should be inherent in our system, and it's not.
Because there's this kind of bifurcation between the criminal and civil sides of things.
Well, the civil system doesn't do that either. So
Really?
If you're awarded a judgment in the civil system, you've no resources available to you to help you collect. But speaking just specifically in the criminal case, we had a victim's advocate assigned to us in the criminal system. So we had someone that was there to meet us and to walk us through the trial and to be there for us and help us with questions, and to help us with paperwork so that we can get mental health treatment that's afforded for a certain number of sessions or dollar amount. I forget exactly what it is. You can have parts of your funeral expenses be covered by the state because that all comes out of the victim restitution fund. But not every state has enough money to have victims advocates. And so not every victim knows they're entitled to an advocate. And so you don't know to ask for one. You don't know to ask questions that you don't know because you've never been in that situation. And so, and again, each state is run differently. So I'm not an expert in every single state as it relates to victims' rights, but it shouldn't be this difficult. Every prosecutor, every law enforcement agent should know exactly what the rights are for those victims in that state. And we shouldn't be fighting so hard to be protected under a system that's supposed to be designed to protect all of us.
So you find you're able to work synergistically with those who are, Innocence Project type people and working against wrongful convictions, or do you guys sometimes seem at cross purposes?
I haven't gotten involved in the Innocence Project, and I don't know that that's exactly where I want to be putting all my energy right now. I feel more strongly in making sure that the victims are a priority, not making sure that people that are wrongfully convicted are free. Not that I'm against it. It's just there's enough people doing that. We got to work on the other side because there's so many of us that come through the pipeline of people that are left in the wake of tragedy that I think better attention for me is better suited working in that realm. But I definitely do support being part of the conversation for criminal justice reform. And I'm working with the National Center to try to make that happen.
So this is really a state by state battle when you're dealing with these kinds of reforms?
Yeah, because like I said, every state, runs a little bit differently, and for whatever reason, depending on politics and depending on the political agenda of different states dictates where victims' rights fall on the Richter scale. Even if you look from a federal perspective, we haven't passed the Violence Against Women Act. I mean, I don't know why that's still stalled in Congress. That's a no-brainer, but it's a money issue for some. And I'd look at that and think, find the money. You find the money for everything else, find a way to make sure that, victims of domestic violence and stalking and sexual assault have the resources they need to be safe in their communities. That needs to be a priority. I don't want to get super political, but gun safety, I mean, there's all these issues that we can meet the needs of both if we just come to it with an open heart and an open mind and, and recognize that there's lots of us out here that feel passionate and can also be reasonable while we're passionate or pissed.
What can ordinary people do if they want to get involved in this kind of advocacy?
You know what? I would say pay attention to your local government, pay attention to your city council. I know it sounds silly, but start at the base, like school board, city council, know who your senators are, know their position on victims' rights, on law enforcement, read the bills before you vote on them. Don't just read the hashtag because it's meant to confuse people. Get involved. I know that there's a lot of people that think it doesn't faze me. It's going to one day. We're all touched by crime on some level, whether we realize it or not. It's in our communities, it's in our schools, it's in our homes. But if we plead ignorance to it and we don't research and get involved and educate ourselves, then we have no one to blame but ourselves. So find out what's passionate to you, find out the ramifications of certain bills passing, where money's going, vote for your district attorneys, vote for your judges, know what their backgrounds are as it relates to crime and law enforcement. I don't know, I just say educate ourselves and try not to be complacent. I know it's a lot to digest.
Has the podcast been therapeutic for you after all these years?
Yeah, it was great. As hard as it was great. I realized I'm a lot more mature than I thought in some areas. And I don't mean that I'm immature, but I think that I am more, mature is the only word I can use in terms of my thinking. I always knew I was able to separate my heart and my mind from certain things. But doing this process, I realized that I'm much further along on that road than I realized I was. And I also recognize the need to be open-minded. I think I've always been pretty open-minded, but this process has been really helpful in that regard to remind me to do that and then to invite other people into that process as well.
How have you tried to memorialize Ron in your own life? What have you done to keep his memory alive?
I think every day that I'm being a good mom to my kid and being a good community leader and doing the work that I get to do with the Youth Project and affecting the lives of these teenagers that I work with and the advocacy work that I get to do. I think I do all those things in my brother's memory, but also because I want to leave a good legacy for my family. But my brother, I carry my pin that I was talking about earlier. It's still in my car where my mirror is. I wear his necklace and his ring. I haven't taken them off since he died. I talk to him all the time. And I speak of him as often as I can because I think it's important for people to realize what a true hero is.
Kim, where can people learn more? What are the best resources to learn more about your story, the work that you've been doing, the advocacy, whatever links, or you have so many different aspects of your journey, but what would you want to?
You're so nice. I would say if I could get my act together, my website, I'm slow on that, but my website, which is KimberlyGoldman.com, is a good way, but probably on Twitter is where I try to keep most up to date, which is just at Kim E. Goldman. I try to be more active there with the stuff that I'm working on, and then hopefully it translates over to the website. I do that in my insomniac hours.
There you go. Each of these things takes time. I get it. I get it. Well, it's an incredible story. And what's so powerful to me is that you've taken what's really a very personal tragedy and a tragedy that was really almost not allowed to be appreciated. And it was so drowned by so much else, and you've taken that and translated it into incredible good for other people and to help so many victims out there and families of victims. And that's, I think, a really important lesson for everyone listening, to be able to translate personal suffering into goodness for others. So thank you for that work. And thanks for bringing these incredible things to our attention. Kim Goldman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ari. I appreciate the time.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/JewsYouShouldKnow. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.